John Eldredge, in his book called The Journey of Desire, writes a short story about a sea lion. And I've actually read the first two paragraphs here before, but I still find it kind of relevant to what we're talking about this morning, so I'm going to read it again. It says, "Once upon a time there lived a sea lion who had lost the sea. He lived in a country known as the Barren Lands, high on a plateau far from any coast. It was a place so dry and dusty that it could only be called a desert. A kind of coarse grass grew in patches here and there, and a few trees were scattered across the horizon, but mostly it was dust. Dust and sometimes the wind, which together made one very thirsty. Of course, it must seem strange to you that such a beautiful creature should wind up in a desert at all. He was, mind you, a sea lion. But things like this do happen. How the sea lion came to the Barren Lands, no one could remember. It all seems so very long ago. In fact, it appeared as though he had always been there. Not that he belonged in such an arid place. How could that be? He was, after all, a sea lion. But as you know, once you have lived so long in a certain spot, no matter how odd, you come to think of it as home." Starting the summer, right before my junior year of high school, some of my friends and my dad would take a camping trip around the 4th of July up to a place called Argentine Pass. It's a 4-wheel drive trail, and it's pretty easy. It takes you to the top of a mountain right in the center of the Continental Divide. Right, you guys know what the Continental Divide is, right? Where the water splits and goes to either the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. So you end up right on top of a mountain there, and it's really easy to start out. Like at the bottom of it, you see families setting up camp all along the trail until you get to this spot. This spot right here, and right off the screen that way is a small waterfall, and it's a lot more intimidating in person, but I'm driving, and I edited out the 2 minutes of me just sitting there before I actually drove through the thing, because I was like freaking out. But this is kind of like the gateway, if you will, to the good stuff, right? And then you round a corner right up the ways just a little bit, and that same stream is a little bit wider, so shallower. And for about a quarter mile, the trail is just driving up the riverbed, which is really cool. And then up towards the top, you start switching back and forth, going along the mountains, and eventually you end up here, right at the top of the mountain. And if you look out one direction, this would be your view. That's looking out one direction. But then if you were to turn 180 degrees and face the other way, that's your view. That's just all you can see, every way you turn. It was so beautiful that we decided to make that a regular trip. We did that for the next 3 years, and this is where we ended up setting up camp for the night. But it was nighttime. It was nighttime that always really, really blew my mind away. Have you ever been in the middle of nowhere in the mountains at night? Yeah? Okay, Como's a little closer to Denver than this was, so you couldn't see quite as many as you could here. But the stars, right? The stars. Okay, so every year we were lucky and it was clear, and you could just see down the middle of the sky the thick band of the Milky Way. Okay, I didn't take that picture. I just pulled it off of Google. We didn't have a fancy camera that could take pictures of the stars, but that is accurate to my memory of what we got to see. It was amazing. So we're starting this series this morning called Pray It Through. Every situation you come to in life, we need to be encouraged to pray it through, but I want to start right off the bat with acknowledging maybe a problem, at least for myself. A lot of the time maybe it seems like God isn't listening or too busy to care about my tiny problems. So how am I supposed to persistently and faithfully pray when it seems like God is nowhere to be found? Right, and we know that the church answer is that God is always listening, right? But that doesn't really help me when I'm going through struggles or have lost hope in my life. Where are you, God? And trips like the one up Argentine Pass or to Camp Como or whatever stir up something in me, stir up the deepest desires of my heart. That's what great novels do, or great movies, or great lives. If you hear about someone who had a huge impact, it stirs something inside of us. I've mentioned this a lot here, but it is just so crazy to me how fast our hearts can move from excitement and anticipation for life to complacency and resignation. Nothing can affect our hearts in that way like feeling that God isn't present with us or doesn't care. So this is where the story of the sea lion seems still so relevant to me. We have lived so long, so far away from the deepest desires of our hearts that we have begun to call the life that we are living home. And we have to find our way back. So let's hop over to Luke chapter 18. We're going to start in verse 35. It says, as Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard the crowd going by, he asked what was happening, and they told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. So he called out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And those who led the way rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Mark tells this same story, and in his gospel, we learn that this guy's name is Bartimaeus. Okay, you can call him Bart if you want. I don't think he'll be offended. He's dead. But after years of begging, he's probably resigned to the fact that this is just what his life is going to be for the rest of his life. All right, this is a story of resignation. Henry David Thoreau, the writer, says that the mass of men head to the grave with a song still in their hearts. Something that they wanted to accomplish but never did. How sad is that? And the truth for most of us is that we lead lives of quiet resignation. Just like the sea lion destined for the sea. So where do you connect with Bartimaeus in this story? What part of your life is not how you maybe hoped that it would be? Is it your health, your marriage, your family? All of us have at least moments of quiet resignation in our stories. So what is it? What is it? Let's keep going. In verse 40, it says, Jesus stopped and ordered the man to be brought to him. When he came near, Jesus asked him, what do you want me to do for you? Lord, I want to see, he replied. What do you want me to do for you? Do not miss the significance of what is happening here in this moment. Jesus does not ask him what he needs. He goes after the desires of his heart. Jesus is not simply interested in healing this man. He is trying to go where he has lost hope and where he has lost heart. The good news here is that Jesus wants to do the same thing for us. So start here with this really, really important question. Where have I lost hope and where have I lost heart? I have lost hope that blank, fill it in. Because it is so easy. It's so easy for us to move from excitement and anticipation for life to complacency and resignation. Right? It's so easy for a ton of reasons. There's so much working against us here in our dreams and our desires. We have an enemy in our story who hates our desire. Right, there's an enemy in our story who hates us, not only you, he hates the idea of you ever connecting or reconnecting with God. He hates your desire. He isn't just there to be like, oh, hey man, doesn't that look good? Go ahead, eat it, drink it, snort it, touch it, whatever. He also hates your desire. Right, so he tries to seduce it. He tries to trap it in addiction. He tries to kill it. And if he can't do that, he'll just bury it in a life of duty and obligation. And if he can't do that, he tries to convince you that all desire does in your life is lead you to disappointment. Hey, remember when you were a kid, all those dreams you had? Yeah, how did that work out? Or remember when you were very first married and all of the hopes and dreams and expectations you had for that relationship? How did that work out? Right, because he hates our dreams and desires for our life. Why? It's not because desire is bad, otherwise he would like our desires. It's because the deepest desires, the most core desires of our hearts were placed there by God himself. It's who you were created to be, and he knows that if you start to walk down this path, it'll lead you to the life that God has planned for you. Desire is a really big roadmap for us back to our place in the story. And so you want to know what your purpose in life is? You want to know why God put you here? Start chasing after this. What is the deepest desire of my heart? Another thing that's working against us can unfortunately be the people around us that should be helping us the most, right? Bartimaeus jumps up and he seeks Jesus, and then the church people, all of his supposed friends, tell him to shut up. Right? The name Jesus stirs something in him, and the crowd tells him to be quiet. They say, what you want doesn't matter. And by the way, you answered the question wrong. He asked you what you want, and everybody knows the answer is forgive my sins, baptize me, punch my ticket to heaven, take me on a mission trip, or teach me how to tithe. All right, those are the appropriate answers when talking to Jesus. And you said you want to see? You said you want to see? How selfish is that? What you want doesn't matter. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever had an experience or maybe years of experiences where you were left feeling like the desires of your heart really don't matter to God? And that's why this story is so significant for us. Jesus goes after Bartimaeus' desires. And Jesus doesn't seem offended at all that Bartimaeus thinks he needs to see more than he needs to be saved. He doesn't flinch. He just dives into the places where Bartimaeus has lost hope and lost heart. So where have I lost hope and lost heart? Because when we lose heart, we start to do something, all of us, every one of us, to help deal with the pain of not achieving our dreams. We reduce life down to feeding the cat, going to work, eating dinner, and repeat the next day. It is cat, not dog. Cat. We downsize desire to small little things like a new sofa or a nicer house or a trip to Florida. All right, all desire does is lead to disappointment, so we downsize it. Or unfortunately, some of us have just killed it altogether because we think desire is bad in church. So we kill it, and then we call that sanctification. We convince ourselves that deadness is next to godliness. Some of us have put so much distance between ourselves and the deepest desires of our hearts because we think that's what we're supposed to do. But we're sea lions. We're destined for the sea. Those desires are placed there by God himself. That's why the core desires of our hearts aren't a new car. All right, that's not like the core desire of your heart. I have a Jeep. I love it. There's nothing wrong with me having a Jeep and loving it. Okay, but that's not the core of who I am. The core of who God made us to be is something so much more than that. So let's keep going. In verse 42 it says, Jesus said to him, "Receive your sight, your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and he followed Jesus, praising God. And when all the people saw it, they also praised God. And the greatest gift that Jesus gives to Bartimaeus here isn't the restoration of his sight. It's the invitation to live in a bigger story. Right, he had his sight restored, and now his life is leading all kinds of people to Jesus. God created us to have an impact, to live in our own unique way as an integral part of his story. And how we can know how we fit in God's story is by listening to him help us unpack our hearts. But there's a problem. Or there can be a problem. There's been a problem a lot in my life. God isn't listening. Right? It's great that he asked Bartimaeus what he wants, but God hasn't talked to me in my entire life. So I stopped talking to him a really long time ago. I would like to maybe challenge that thought a little bit this morning. Prayer is supposed to be a conversation, right? Not a monologue. So if we are praying, God is speaking. I just don't think we're really listening. I don't think we're good at listening, or at least I'm not good at listening, because I know this to be true. God is speaking all the time. Because prayer is a conversation and we are told to pray continually, God is always speaking. We are terrible at hearing his voice or listening to him. If we want God to grant us the desires of our hearts, we have to learn how to hear his voice. We have to learn to listen. And hearing from God is actually really not complicated. It does take a lot of practice, but it's not complicated. If you want to hear from God, one of the first things you need to do is really just start paying attention. God is speaking, but we have to learn to turn the volume of life down. There's just way too much going on that is competing for our attention. And I don't want to blame something, but let's blame something, all right? I wake up to this as my alarm clock every single morning, and then I'm immediately just scrolling through Facebook and Instagram, and then I get up and I get on with my day, and it's busy, right? So if there is silence at any point in any part of our day, what do? Yeah, we make noise. We turn on some music, right? If we get bored, what do? We watch Netflix. We pull out our phone. We turn to some form of entertainment or whatnot. Henry Nouwen once said this: the mystics all agree that silence is the royal road to spiritual formation. I have never met anyone seriously interested in the spiritual life who did not have a growing desire for silence. My life is so full of a constant beeping and buzzing, alerts and push notifications, music, podcasts, commercials, and conversations, and screens, right? Screens everywhere, always blocking my sight, bombarding me with sounds and images, right? We have chosen to live in a state of constant tinnitus, and it's a wonder that any of us can even think at all, let alone pray. A growing spiritual life will not only increasingly seek after moments of silence, it will also find silence to be absolutely necessary. Jesus modeled this really simple truth that noise is toxic to growth, which might partly explain our addiction to it. But don't dismiss yourself too easily just because you're not a teenager attached to your phone, okay? Remember, there are no new human behaviors, all right? Before it was phones, it was a TV. Before that, it was a newspaper. Just because you don't have a screen in your hand doesn't mean you don't know how to distract yourself from reality. All right, but this is a whole other discussion for a whole other day. But if we can't turn the volume down, we will never realize that God is speaking to us. We won't hear him. And the second thing we need to do is ask specific questions. Specific questions. We do not serve a vague God. But sometimes we can pray such vague prayers. Why is that? I don't think it's because we think God is vague. I think it's more because we're scared of the answers. I know that God isn't vague because of how we act in times of crisis. All of a sudden, when life goes from simple to crisis, our prayers get real specific. Right? When your son has an addiction, or when our marriage is falling apart, or when there's a terminal illness, we get very specific with our prayers. When we ask a specific question, the promise is that God will answer. Right? He might say no or give an answer we don't like, but what he will never do is be silent. So we have to ask specific questions, and we have to pay attention. There's a writer, Carlos Whitaker. He tells this story. He helps people start hearing God, like hearing God's voice in their lives. So he's with this guy who wants help. He's meeting with this guy who wants help in this area, and they meet up, and Carlos says, okay, we're going to practice this right now. All right, you're gonna hear from God right now. So the guy's like, starts freaking out a little bit. Okay. All right, I want you to pray. And I want you to ask God, where should we go for lunch? And the dude thinks that's really weird, but he goes ahead and does it. He folds his hands because that's what you're supposed to do, and he looks up, because, the angle, right? So it's gonna get up there. So he prays. He asks God, where do you want us to go to lunch? And then they sit there in a really uncomfortable silence for like 3 minutes. And then Carlos said, so what did you hear? And the guy's like, oh, I don't know, man. I don't know what he sounds like. And then Carlos asked, well, what did you sense? And the guy's like, oh, we're talking about feelings now. Well, I feel stuff all the time. How am I supposed to know what's from God? As don't try to censor the Holy Spirit. We have a tendency to do that. Right, we think it's so weird that God would try to communicate with us through our hearts, through our desires, through our emotions, but God created us. Right? He made us intentionally as emotional beings. The only thing that's weird is that we think it's weird that he would try to communicate with us in this way. Right, my parents have a pretty messed up story, or a messed up part of their story. I've shared it several times. I don't know if you've noticed yet. It kind of played a big role in my life. But my dad had an affair, and my mom chose the very unusual path of forgiveness. I was about 5 years old when that happened. And you know what their relationship was like when she decided to forgive him and they stayed together? It was terrible. It was awful. Okay, what happened? They had 2 kids to raise. They had bills to pay. They had jobs. They had my basketball games, football games. They got busy. Right? There wasn't time to stop and work things out until when? Until after I moved out of the house and went to college. And even then it wasn't instantaneous. It wasn't until my parents started attending this new church in Colorado Springs where they talk a lot about your story. They talk a lot about healing. So my mom decided to go on a women's retreat, and finally, 15 years later, she quietly, with God, dug into her heart and dug into her story. All the parts of it, not just the painful ones, not just the obvious ones. But in a time of quiet, she dug in and found ones that she just randomly remembered and sensed, and they helped her understand how she reacted, how she held on to hate, not for my dad, she had forgiven him, but for other people that she didn't even realize were a part of her story, and that she needed to forgive them. She had settled for the desert of an okay marriage. By no fault of her own, she didn't mess anything up, but she did accept that this is just the way that life is going to be now. And I say that because she says that. That's her telling me her experience on that retreat. But she didn't realize how much more there could be. Right, she didn't think that God cared about her desire to not just have an undivorced marriage, but a happy one. So we need to ask specific questions, and we need to pay attention in silence to what God is communicating to us through our hearts. Pay attention to other people as God may be speaking to us through them, and pay attention to the Word. And the really cool thing, though, is that conversational intimacy with God is supposed to be normal. It's the way that we're made. It's supposed to be normal. We're created in such a way that hearing from God can become very instinctive. Did you know that the human brain is capable of processing language information at twice the average rate of speech? Okay, so God made us this way because the admonition in Scripture to pray continually is meant to be taken literally. It takes a little bit of practice, but I do know this to be true. Like when somebody comes to me and starts having a conversation and I immediately realize like, okay, I am way in over my head. I need a little bit of help to be talking to this person. I can actually pray and listen to God speaking to me and the person at the same time. Conversational intimacy with God is supposed to be normal. Pursuing the desires of our hearts and understanding them and reaching them is supposed to be normal. How do I know that? Because of Bartimaeus' story, but also Romans 8:6. It says that the mind governed by the flesh is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. How often do we try to put a period right there after life? Spirit of, what does it say? The mind governed by the Spirit is life, and we just stop there. But it's life and peace. Or John 10:10, this is one of my favorites in the whole Bible. It says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that they may have life. And it doesn't end there. It says, and have it to the full. Other translations say have it abundantly, not just life, abundant life, fulfilling life. We have convinced ourselves that God doesn't care about our desires and that God is absent or not listening to us, but that is so far from the truth. We're just stuck in a desert thinking that this is all life is supposed to be. Thinking that Jesus came so that we can someday go to heaven and have the desires of our hearts finally fulfilled, that we can have hope someday. But let me tell you something. For Christians, for us, hope doesn't have to be a someday thing. Hope can be a today thing. We don't have to wait for heaven. We can bring heaven to earth right now. We don't have to wait to be fulfilled. We can have a great life now. We don't have to wait for God to heal our brokenness. We don't have to wait for God to take away our pain and our heartbreak. Jesus didn't die on a cross so you can cope. Jesus died so that you can have abundant life, not life in a desert. I talked about Argentine Pass. The mountains are my sea, right? There's nothing like being able to see all those stars at night, in my opinion. But Carlos Whitaker, that same writer I was just talking about earlier, he has a story from a camping experience he took deep in the mountains. He was in Yosemite. But I just want to read his story to you real quick. He said, my kids had gone into the tent for bed. I look up and there are millions of stars in the sky. So I want to take a picture. There are like 19 million stars in the sky. So I run and I grab my wife's camera. She has one of those fancy cameras with all the buttons and the knobs. And I don't know how to use a fancy camera. So when you don't know how to use a fancy camera, what mode do you put it on? Auto mode. Yeah. Why? Because it'll take a picture if you push the button, right? You put it on auto mode. So I put it on auto mode. I grabbed the camera. I aimed it up at the sky. And this is the picture that he took. Yeah, it sucks. There's like 19 stars. Actually, it's too bright in here. There's like 19 stars in that picture. But there are 19 million stars in the sky. I know how expensive this camera is, he says. I know that this camera can take a picture of the stars. But I don't know how to do that, so I call my friend Jeremy. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, but I call my friend Jeremy, who's a professional photographer, and I say, hey, I'm trying to take a picture of the stars. There's like 19 million stars in the sky, but there are only like 19 in the picture. And the first thing he asked me, is the camera in auto mode? I said, well, yeah. And like Yoda himself, he said, you can't take a picture of the abundance of stars in auto mode. Well, but I don't know how to use my camera in manual mode. And he said, yeah, I know, and you will screw up, but if you do what I say, you will inevitably capture the abundance of stars. So the first thing you have to do is you have to find the ISO, and you have to crank the ISO from 100 to 12,000. And I'm like, ISO, what's an ISO? So I'm looking for it. I'm digging through the settings. About 15 minutes later, I finally find it. I do that, and then he says, okay, well, you're not done yet. Now you have to take the aperture, which is also called the f-stop, and you have to lower it from 8.2 to 1.2. And I'm like, f-stop, now it sounds like you're cussing at me, but whatever. So I found that, and it's like 15 more minutes. 15 more minutes, I find the f-stop settings, I crank it down to 1.2, but then I have to change the shutter speed to take it down from 1/30th of a second, where it goes like that, all the way up to 30 seconds, so all the light has time to get in. And he says, well, you're not done yet, because once you do that, you can't hold it anymore, because then it's going to be blurry. So you have to go dig out your tripod, and all I want is a picture of the stars. And I tried this hundreds of times. Once it came out totally black, another time it was 100% white, and I failed, and finally, 40 minutes later, this is the picture that I took. Way prettier, right? Guys, this is what God has in store for us. But this is what we are missing because we're living our life on auto mode. Right, there's so much that God wants for us in life. Sometimes we can't see it. Sometimes we don't even believe it anymore. But this is what God wants for us. All right, we look at this and think that this... Well, we look at this. Corey, can you flip back to the other picture? I didn't tell you to do that. I'm sorry. All right, we look at this, and we think that this is what God has for me. Hey, look at my 19 stars. Isn't it pretty? I can deal with this marriage. I can settle into this career. I can cope with my anxiety. God has given me strength to deal with it. I know I wanted to lead a life that had a huge impact on tons and tons of people, had an impact on the kingdom of God, but I will have an impact on my kids. Look at my 9 stars. This is not what God has in mind for you. And if we could start practicing asking specific questions and paying attention to the desires of our hearts that God placed there, that's the life that He wants you to lead for Him, then we can start to move out of the desert and back to the sea where we belong. If we want to live life with abundance, we have to start praying it through. After a long time in the desert, our sea lion friend met a tortoise who convinced him that was all life ever was going to be, and eventually, after a time, he stopped having dreams of the sea. And the story continues, it was that May that the winds began to blow. The sea lion had grown used to the wind. At first, he did not pay much heed at all. Years of desert life had taught him to turn his back in the direction from which the wind came and cover his eyes with his flippers so that the dust would not get in. Eventually, the winds would always pass, but not this time. Day and night came howling across the barren lands. There was nothing to stop its fury, nothing to even slow it down. For 40 days and 40 nights the wind blew. And then, just as suddenly as it begun, it stopped. And the sea lion lifted himself to have a look around, and he could hardly believe his eyes. Every single leaf had been stripped from his tree that he sought shade under. The branches that had remained with only a twig or two upon them looked like an old scarecrow. And I do not need to tell you this, but there was no longer any shade in which to hide. But worse than this, much worse indeed, was what the sea lion saw next. His tiny, muddy water hole was completely dry. 3 weeks after the wind ceased to blow, the sea lion had a dream. Now, as I told you before, there were nights in which he had dreamed of the sea, but those were long ago and nearly forgotten. Even still, the ocean that filled his dreams that night was so beautiful, so clear, so vast and deep, it was as if he was seeing it for the very first time. The sunlight glittered on his face, and he dived. The waters all around him shone like an emerald. He swam quite deep. It turned to jade, cool, dark, and mysterious. But he was never frightened, not at all. For I must tell you that in all of his dreams of the sea, he had never before found himself in the company of other sea lions. This night, there were many. Round about him, diving and turning, spinning and twirling, they were playing. Oh, how he hated to wake from that wonderful dream. The tears running down his face were the first wet thing he had felt in 3 weeks, but he did not pause even to wipe them away. He did not pause, in fact, for anything at all. He set his face to the east and began to walk as best a sea lion can. "Where are you going?" asked the tortoise. "I am going to find the sea." Listen to your heart's longing. Get your head out of the way. You long for the true, the real, the one life that begets the universe. You know who you are. Your heart reminds you, not your head. Will you pray with me? God, thank you so much for